Welcome to Justice Reloaded HD, where quiet moments speak the loudest. Have you ever noticed how people sometimes stop and stare at a child who's different? How they watch from a distance, but never sit down beside them. Today's story is about a woman who did nothing more than sit down. No big speeches. No grand gestures. Just presence, at the right place, at the right time. And somehow, her entire life changed forever. If you believe that quiet presence can fill the deepest voids, if you believe that kindness doesn't have to be loud to be powerful, then give this video a like, and subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD, where small moments become mighty. Let's begin. The late afternoon sun shimmered on the calm surface of the lake behind Le Bon Rêve, a French restaurant tucked quietly into the suburbs of Seattle. Out back, beyond the clinking of wine glasses and the low murmur of dinner reservations being confirmed, there sat a stone bench, cool, smooth, and shaded by a lone sycamore. It wasn't part of the dining area. It wasn't even meant to be inviting. It was just there. A place for guests to wait without waiting. That's where Andrew Callahan stood, hands in the pockets of his tailored navy coat, his silver wristwatch catching the last golden slant of sun. Always early. Always composed. Always distant. The maitre d' had told him the table would be ready in 10 minutes. Andrew never liked idle time, but he loathed unpredictability even more. So he nodded curtly, then turned to his son. "Eli," he said in a tone that made the boy flinch slightly, "go sit outside for a bit. I'll call you when it's time." The 8-year-old did not reply. He simply walked, as he often did, like someone tracing invisible lines on the ground. Step by quiet step, until he reached the bench. He sat, hands folded around a worn Rubik's Cube, the stickers faded at the edges. Not turning it. Not solving it. Just holding it. His shoulders curled inward. His eyes stared downward. His lips didn't move. And his father, still standing near the doorway, didn't sit with him. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with pre-dinner preparation. The scent of rosemary butter and garlic cream floated through the air. Servers in black shirts and burgundy aprons moved swiftly between the kitchen and the floor. Nia Johnson was wiping down a polished walnut table near the patio doors when she spotted the boy. She paused for just a second. It wasn't that she'd never seen a quiet child before. But there was something in the stillness of that moment, the way his small frame looked suspended in time, surrounded by noise but untouched by it, that made her hands freeze mid-wipe. She'd seen this before. Not here, not in this restaurant. But in another life, in a classroom on the South Side, where she used to be a teaching assistant for children with special needs. Before the tips stopped being enough. Before the rent grew teeth. Nia glanced toward the maitre d'. He was busy on the phone. The kitchen staff was shouting about missing parsley. No one was watching the boy. Not even the man in the suit who looked like he owned the place. So she walked outside. Her steps were slow, deliberate. Not cautious, respectful. She didn't want to startle him. Didn't want to impose. She noticed the space beside him. Just enough room for someone to sit, if they knew how. And she did. With the practiced grace of someone who had once memorized the personal bubbles of dozens of children, she lowered herself to the bench, and sat precisely one hand length away from him. Not closer. Not too far. Just enough. She said nothing. Didn't look at him directly. Her eyes gazed gently at the lake, as if it had something to say. She crossed her ankles and rested her hands in her lap. She breathed in once, not too loud, and let it go. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the boy blinked. Just once. His fingers shifted slightly on the Rubik's Cube. His head tilted, not toward her but just off-center, like he'd registered a presence and hadn't yet decided what to do with it. Nia didn't move. She knew the rules. Let him lead. Let silence be the first language. She waited. From inside, Andrew noticed. He stepped half out of the restaurant, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the woman beside his son. His jaw tightened. A part of him wanted to storm out, to demand that she back off, that she not disrupt the fragile balance he managed so carefully. But something made him pause. Eli hadn't flinched. He hadn't recoiled or stiffened or shut down. He was sitting, still holding the cube, still facing downward. But not alone. Andrew watched from behind the window pane, arms crossed tight over his chest. His eyes, cool and calculating like they always were in the boardroom, now carried something sharper, something closer to alarm. There was a woman sitting next to his son. Not just standing nearby. Not offering help from a distance. But actually seated. On the same bench. Close. His first instinct was to go out there and end it. This wasn't a public park. This wasn't her place. And Eli didn't tolerate people in his space. Not strangers. Not servers. Not anyone. Andrew's hand moved toward the patio door, ready to push through and intervene. But then, something strange stopped him cold. Eli hadn't screamed. Hadn't bolted. Hadn't frozen. Instead, the boy had tilted his head. Just slightly. And then, just for a moment, he looked up. Not at the woman. Not all the way. But upward, as if noticing her presence not as a threat, but as something else. Andrew's breath caught in his throat. He stared, unwilling to blink. From the bench, Nia didn't move. She hadn't turned her head toward the boy. She hadn't reached out. She hadn't spoken. What she did do, very slowly, and with a calm that came only from years of knowing what not to do, was slip her hand into the pocket of her apron and pull something out. A cube. It wasn't bright like Eli's. Its colors were chipped and dulled from age. The white side had a sticker missing. The orange side didn't turn smoothly. But it was hers. And it had been with her for a long time. She didn't hold it up. Didn't offer it to him. She simply turned it in her hands, once. Click. Click. Eli's fingers twitched. Andrew saw it. From behind the glass, he saw his son's posture shift by the tiniest fraction, his shoulders straightening, his chin lifting a notch. The boy glanced, sideways this time, and noticed the other cube. Still no words. Still no eye contact. But Eli's thumb moved. He turned his own cube once, mimicking her pace. Click. Click. A rhythm formed, almost accidental. One turn from her cube, then one from his. Not in unison, not matching, but echoing. She looked straight ahead the whole time, like she wasn't even aware of him. But of course she was. Every inch of her was alert. Eli turned the red side. She followed with the blue. She rotated the top. He adjusted the bottom. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't even an interaction, really. But to Andrew, still frozen at the door, watching through disbelief and glass, it was a miracle. This boy, who once cried if someone stepped too close. This boy, who lived in patterns and silence and space, was choosing to stay. Was choosing to sit. With her. Andrew didn't step outside. He couldn't. Something inside him told him that if he moved, if he interfered, the spell would break. So he stayed where he was, watching. Watching his son not reject someone. Watching a waitress do something no therapist had pulled off in months. Simply, exist beside him. No agenda. No expectations. Just quiet companionship, the kind that didn't press or demand. Just two people. Sitting. Twisting old toys in their hands. The afternoon light softened around them. The lake behind them shimmered in the fading gold. And still, neither spoke. Neither needed to. The quiet between them might have lasted 5 minutes or 5 hours. Neither seemed to mind. The cube turned gently in each of their hands, a kind of silent dance between solitude and presence. From the doorway, Andrew Callahan had barely breathed. He watched, jaw tight, unsure whether to interrupt what was happening or protect it. The instinct to control wrestled with the rarest flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time, wonder. But then the rational voice in his head, the one trained by years of boardrooms and risk management, kicked in. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't safe. This wasn't what Eli needed, right? He stepped outside. The patio stones clicked faintly beneath his Italian leather shoes. The scent of rosemary and rain mixed in the air. His voice wasn't harsh, he didn't shout. But it cut through the moment like a line drawn in the sand. "Please don't engage with him," Andrew said, every syllable clipped and careful. "He doesn't respond well to strangers." Nia looked up, slowly, calmly. There was no guilt in her expression. No embarrassment. No defensiveness. Just understanding. She stood, her movements fluid, graceful, the way you do when you're used to not being welcome for long. But her voice, when she spoke, had the softness of someone who'd seen too much to pretend. "I didn't engage," she said quietly. "I just sat. Sometimes, that's enough." And then it happened. The kind of moment you don't plan for. The kind of moment that undoes you. As Nia began to step away, Eli's small hand reached out. Not toward his father. Not toward the cube. Toward her. His fingers curled gently around the sleeve of her sweater. Not tugging. Not pulling. Just holding on. Andrew froze. His mind couldn't compute what he was seeing. His son, the boy who flinched at accidental contact, who once screamed for 45 minutes after a nurse brushed his arm, was holding on to someone. Voluntarily. Deliberately. And not just anyone, a stranger. A waitress. A woman he'd never met until today. Andrew's lips parted, but no words came. His throat was dry. He looked at Eli, really looked, for the first time in weeks. Maybe months. The boy's eyes weren't wild. Weren't confused. They were steady. And his hand, still on Nia's sleeve, trembled, but didn't let go. Nia didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply stood there, letting the boy decide. Letting the moment unfold without trying to shape it. Andrew blinked hard. Part of him wanted to say something. Anything. To regain control. To pull his son back into the familiar shell they both had lived inside for so long. But the rest of him, the part that still remembered what hope used to feel like, just stood there. Letting this happen. Letting the silence breathe. Letting the touch mean what it needed to mean. And for a long stretched-out second that felt like standing still inside a clock, no one moved. No one spoke. No one broke the spell. The next day, the skies over Seattle were heavy with clouds, the kind that warned of rain without quite committing to it. Inside Le Bon Rêve, the lunch rush had thinned to a soft hum. A few late diners lingered over espresso. Cutlery clinked gently against ceramic. Nia was finishing up a refill on table 12 when she saw him, standing just beyond the host podium, alone this time, no child in sight. Andrew Callahan. Still in his suit. Still composed. But something in his face looked less armored. She wiped her hands on her apron and approached him, not hurried, not hesitant. Just present. "You're back," she said simply. He nodded. "I was hoping we could talk." It wasn't a demand. That surprised her. Nia gestured toward the patio. "We're between shifts. It's quiet out there." They stepped outside, back to the same bench by the lake. But this time, they didn't sit. Not yet. Andrew looked down at the stones under his feet, as if choosing his words from somewhere deep beneath the surface. "He hasn't looked anyone in the eye," he said finally, "since his mother died." Nia didn't interrupt. Andrew glanced sideways. "I thought maybe it was permanent. That whatever got broken in him just couldn't be reached anymore." Nia exhaled softly, her gaze drifting toward the water's edge. "Grief does that," she said. "It seals people off. Grown-ups try to act like it's not there. Kids? They don't know how to pretend. Andrew's jaw clenched, not in anger, but in restraint. He didn't want to cry. Not here. Not now. I've done everything, he said. Doctors. Specialists. Therapists. I fly them in. The best. The most expensive. And yet, his voice faltered. None of them could get him to do what you did just by sitting down. Nia looked at him then, fully. Not intimidated. Not impressed. Maybe what he needed, she said slowly, wasn't someone to fix him. Just someone who didn't try. Andrew went quiet. The weight of that sentence landed harder than he expected. All this time, he believed his son was a problem to solve. A lock waiting for the right key. But maybe he wasn't a puzzle. Maybe he was a person. One who didn't want to be figured out, just felt. He rubbed the back of his neck, something almost boyish about the gesture. I didn't know what to do, he said. Still don't. That's okay, Nia replied. Maybe he doesn't either. Maybe you can just not know together. He gave her a look then, the kind of look a man gives when his world starts to shift under him, when something hard and rigid begins to soften from the inside. For a moment, they both stood in silence again. Not the awkward kind. The honest kind. Then Nia added, yesterday wasn't a breakthrough. It wasn't magic. I know, Andrew said. It was just a moment. But sometimes that's all a person needs to take the next breath. He nodded. Slowly. Almost with reverence. Then he surprised her. Do you think you'd be willing to sit with him again? Nia didn't answer right away. She looked back toward the bench, toward where the two Rubik's Cubes had rested in quiet harmony just yesterday. Then she looked back at Andrew. That depends, she said. Are you asking me as a waitress, or as someone who sees him? He blinked. Then he said softly, as someone who sees him. Only then did Nia nod. Andrew's email arrived 3 days later. It was brief, formal, and carefully worded, the kind of message you send when you're used to negotiating mergers, not asking someone to sit beside your child. He offered Nia a position. Not as a therapist. Not as a nanny. The subject line read simply, Eli, companion support proposal. In the body, he detailed a contract, complete with a weekly schedule, compensation, and expectations. Polished. Professional. Distant. Nia didn't reply right away. Instead, she waited until her next shift, approached him between dessert orders, and said, I'm not interested in the title. Andrew blinked. I understand. But, she added, I'll come by. A few hours a week. No pressure. No program. Just be there. His shoulders dropped just slightly, like something he'd been holding finally let go. Okay, he said. That's enough. And it was. So each week, at the house tucked into the hills north of Lake Washington, Nia arrived. Always the same way, quietly on time, carrying nothing but a small notebook and her old Rubik's Cube in her bag. She never knocked loudly. She never greeted Eli with exaggerated cheer. She just slipped off her shoes, offered a soft nod to Andrew, and found the same spot on the carpeted floor where Eli sat by the window. She didn't ask him questions. She didn't push him to talk. She simply sat beside him, legs crossed, often a few feet away, enough to offer comfort without invading space. Sometimes she'd open a book and begin to read softly to herself, barely audible. Sometimes she'd turn the cube in her hands with absent-minded rhythm, letting the clicks fill the quiet room. Eli never looked at her directly. Not at first. But he didn't leave the room either. Didn't scream. Didn't retreat. He stayed. And in the world of a child who guarded his silence like a shield, that was everything. Week by week, a routine began to form. On Tuesdays, they both brought their Rubik's Cubes and sat in near-matching positions by the wide bay window. On Thursdays, she read a chapter from a well-worn fantasy novel, and Eli, though never looking up, would shift his body slightly closer. Andrew watched from a distance, never interfering, often forgetting to breathe when something small, a glance, a pause, a hum, occurred. Then came the morning when everything changed. It was gray outside, the kind of morning that held the hush of a coming drizzle. The living room lights were low, and Nia was mid-turn on her cube, her fingers slow, unhurried. Eli sat beside her, close enough now that their knees nearly touched. He was working on his own cube, not with frantic speed, but with quiet purpose. Click. Slide. Turn. Then, he stopped. Nia didn't look over. She'd learned not to. But in the corner of her eye she saw it, his small hands cupping the cube he'd just solved, the colors perfectly aligned on each face. Then, without a word, he placed it gently into her open palm. Her fingers closed slowly around it, reverent, surprised. It was the first time he'd ever handed it to anyone. The first time he'd given away something he loved, not out of request or instruction, but choice. She didn't say thank you. That would have been too loud for the moment. She just looked down at the object, then at the boy beside her, and gave a barely there nod. And he stayed seated. Not pulling away. Not asking for it back. Just sitting beside her, as if he understood what he'd done. 1 year later, the bench was still there, the same smooth stone slab tucked beneath the sycamore tree behind Luban Rev. But it no longer belonged just to a restaurant. It had become something else entirely. They called it the Bench Project. A quiet name for a quiet mission, to teach adults how to sit beside children who don't always speak, don't always look you in the eye, and don't always want to be fixed. Andrew and Nia had launched it together. Not with press conferences or ribbon cuttings. Just a small gathering in the restaurant's back garden, where the sun slanted low and warm through the trees and people sat, awkwardly at first, then more gently, as they learned how to just be there. The program wasn't clinical. There were no diagnoses required, no forms to fill. Just a circle of benches and a simple ask, can you sit with a child in silence? Can you let them be exactly who they are, without asking for more? Volunteers came. Teachers. Retired nurses. Grandparents. Even young professionals who had never sat still a day in their lives. And each time they began, Nia would say, this isn't a training. It's a remembering. We're here to remember how to sit with someone, not to change them, not to guide them, just to honor them. The symbol of the project, the image used on flyers, on the modest website, and on a small plaque beside the original bench, was a photograph. No caption. No slogan. Just a picture. Taken in the late afternoon light. Eli and Nia sitting side by side on that same bench, each holding a Rubik's Cube. The colors muted by shadow and time. The sunlight brushing across their shoulders from behind. There was a quiet space between them. Not too far. Not too close. Just enough. In the photo, Eli's head was tilted slightly toward Nia, not all the way, but enough to show presence. And Nia's eyes weren't on the boy. They were on the lake. Calm. Unassuming. The power of the image wasn't in their faces. It was in the posture, the distance, the shared stillness. People who saw it didn't always understand it at first. But those who'd ever sat beside someone grieving, someone different, someone withdrawn, they knew exactly what it meant. And in community centers across the city, then the state, more benches appeared. Some were stone. Some wood. Some were just painted lines on playgrounds or designated corners in classrooms. But all carried the same spirit. Andrew, who once measured success in numbers and contracts, began measuring it in minutes of silence held between two people. And Nia, who once folded napkins and refilled glasses between double shifts, now trained others to pause, to listen, and above all, not to interfere. It wasn't a revolution. It wasn't even loud. But it changed people. Changed how they saw children who didn't wave back. Changed how they reacted when someone didn't meet their gaze. Changed what it meant to help. One day, a teacher who just joined the project asked Nia, "What do we say if the child doesn't speak to us?" Nia had smiled and replied, "Then we listen harder," to the silence. And with that, the bench project grew, quietly, beautifully. A tribute to one boy. One woman who sat beside him. And the space in between, where healing began. Sometimes, healing doesn't come from the words we say, but from the quiet presence we offer. In a world that moves too fast, where solutions are prized more than silence, this story reminds us of the power of simply being there. The boy didn't need fixing. He needed space to be seen without judgment. The woman didn't come with answers. She came with stillness, patience, and heart. And through that quiet companionship, a frightened child found the courage to reach out. Many of us, especially as we grow older, have felt the sting of being misunderstood or overlooked. But perhaps the most sacred gift we can offer, to children, to loved ones, to strangers, is our calm presence. No advice. No pressure. Just presence. You don't have to be trained to make a difference. Sometimes, the most profound moments come when we stop trying to do something and start learning how to be with someone. So if you know someone carrying silence or sorrow, don't rush to fix them. Sit beside them. Let your presence speak the love that words cannot. If you believe there are children who don't need your explanations, just your quiet presence beside them. Leave a like for those brave enough to do nothing except be there. And don't forget to subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD, where gentle moments reveal the truths we didn't know we were missing. We'll see you next time.